and respecting your time. Very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for making the time to attend this webinar today. This is Sucharita Kamath, who heads the Andy India chapter, and it's a pleasure to have you join us. Without much ado, just a few logistics, and then I'm going to hand over to this erudite panel of Amrut and Atula from Game Changers Law, Aparna from Asha Impact Trust, and Ria from the UNDP SDG Finance Facility. We will circulate notes and the recording of this webinar and the presentation post this the webinar, so don't worry about that. Also, questions, we will address questions at the end of the presentation session. So if you can type your questions into the Q&A box, please, that would be very helpful, because that will mean that the unanswered questions get saved, and we can ensure that we get back to you to answers that we're not able to address today. Right? So Aparna, over to you to start with introductions.
Great, thanks for that, Suchi, and good evening, good morning, depending on where you're all dialing in from. As Suchi mentioned, I'm Aparna. I lead the think tank at Asha Impact. We were set up, just a quick intro about us, we were set up in 2014 by Vikram Gandhi and Pramod Bhasin, and we're a network of some of India's leading business leaders as well as philanthropists, which leverages their collective expertise and capital to fund scalable businesses that are engaged in the process of delivery of essential goods and services for mass markets in India. The think tank, which is what I lead, actually catalyzes the tri-sector, so government, the for-profit sector, and non-profits, to really overcome policy bottlenecks and critical funding gaps through blended finance instruments, again, to help scale inclusive business models. Asha Impact is one of the co-chairs of the Andy SGB Finance Lab. This is a lab that was set up focusing primarily on finding solutions to address some of the critical funding gaps that SGBs face today. As part of the SGB Finance Lab, we'd started a webinar series around demystifying blended finance last year. And one of the topics of interest that we covered was on social success notes. Now, the webinar series was really focused on bringing together practitioners and experts to talk about these different instruments, how they've been piloted the world over, and then really catalyzing a market for them in India and then globally as well, depending on where Andy's footprint is. As part of this webinar series, we've also launched an SSN playbook, or a playbook on social success notes, which was a culmination of MSTF, UBS, YSB, as well as other social businesses. I'll stop over there, hand it over to Ria to introduce herself, and then to Amrut and Atula to introduce themselves from Game Changer Law Advisors.
Thanks, Aparna, and good evening and good morning to everyone. My name is Ria, and I'm working with the SDG Finance Facility, which is housed by UNDP, but is established with the support of the Swiss Development Corporation and Niti Aayog. We're a facility which has been recently set up about a year ago, and the objective of the platform is primarily to drive blended finance instruments. We're keen to support the incubation ideation of such instruments, which often take too long and are often seen as very challenging. So how can we accelerate that process and try to spread more awareness on the benefits of different blended finance instruments and take them to scale is with which we've been working. And we're very happy to partner with Andy and all the members on the panel here to discuss how social success notes can be an integral component, especially in a time like this. So we'll pause here and excited to hear the presentation and also take up questions as we go along. Amrut, Atula, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for that, lead-in introductions from Aparna and Ria. I'm Amrut Joshi. I have with me on this webinar my colleague Atula Krishnamurthy, and we are both representing a firm called Game Changer Law Advisors. I set up the firm in October 2011, And over the last 8 to 9 years, we've been privileged to work with a number of social enterprises and other stakeholders. Sorry about the interruption. So we work with a broad range of stakeholders in the social impact ecosystem, including impact consulting firms, social impact incubators, accelerators, impact investment funds, and small and growing businesses that are social enterprises as well. That's a quick introduction about us. We're very excited to be participating in this particular program and sharing our insights on the legal framework for social success notes in India. Yeah, so I think with that we can dive into the presentation if that's okay with everyone.
Hey, Amrut, before we start, I think we just wanted to do a quick poll to get a sense now that we've actually had a lot more people join us.
Sure.
I think a good point to get a sense of how much this audience sort of already knows. So I'm going to just run that poll, and if I could request participants, it's a simple yes or no, so it should be simple enough.
Sure.
Okay, so there we go. Aparna, you have a bit of context setting to do, given what you're seeing, but I'm sure, by the end of this presentation, we should be able to answer at least most of the questions. And I think a good point to then ask this audience to watch out for the playbook when it's there, because we have indeed tried to really simplify it and make things clear as possible. So do keep that in mind, participants. And yes, back to you, Aparna, to take this ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Suchi. So before we really jump into what a social success note, I think it's important to kind of lay some context as to why we're even looking at such instruments, right? So social enterprises, as most of you know, have a dual mission of achieving impact and financial returns. And often it's this dual focus that actually leads, creates challenges for them to actually raise capital. They don't necessarily have those hockey stick projections that a lot of investors, whether it's commercial or impact investors, are looking for. So they often struggle to raise capital and may be forced to kind of drift away from their social mission. So the real reason why one is sort of looking at instruments such as a social success note is to make it simpler for enterprises with a proven business as well as impact model to actually raise affordable debt, which is actually linked to achievement of social outcomes as well. And goes without saying, as and when these enterprises can access this debt, they're able to scale their business and able to scale and catalyze and amplify their impact even further. So, so social success notes very simply is a blended finance and a pay for success instrument that is helping social enterprises raise capital, which is linked to achieving social outcomes. And again, just to stress the fact that these are enterprises which have a proven business model as well as an impact model, which is sort of inherent. So how does this really work, right? So what we have on the screen is a basic model that is explaining how a social success note really works. So you have an investor. This is typically, I wouldn't call them a commercial investor, so to speak, because till date, we haven't really seen commercial investors participate. But we have an impact investor or a return-seeking investor who lends or gives a loan to a social enterprise. The social enterprise actually works with beneficiaries to provide the goods and services and works with a target set of beneficiaries. Once they feel that they've been able to provide these goods and services, an independent evaluator, which is your M&E partner, actually verifies the impact that's been created on the ground. The social enterprise actually repays the investor, gives them the principal back, and is liable to pay the interest as well, but this is a concessionary loan that they are repaying to the investor. The outcome payer actually tops up that interest payment such that the investor is then able to realize near market rate or market rate returns. And hence, what happens for a social enterprise is they are able to get access to affordable debt. The investor looks at this as an investing opportunity which is now more attractive for them than it would have been in a traditional setting. The outcome funder is able to leverage this external capital that has come in and amplify their impact. And most importantly, beneficiaries are able to get access to goods and services that they didn't have access to earlier. So that's really how social success note works. Amrut, if we can just go to the next slide. Yeah, so as I mentioned, it's really helping align all stakeholders on a common mission to scale impact, and is a win-win for all the different stakeholders involved: your risk investor or your impact investor, your outcome funder, your beneficiaries, as well as the service provider who's able to get access to this low-cost loan. So with that, I'll stop. Hopefully that's helped provide some content, and I think context, sorry. And I think it's important to also state that such instruments, specifically in a post-COVID world, become even more relevant and important as we see funding really dry up, for social enterprises. So in that context, I'll hand over to Amrut and Atula to really walk us through the legal aspects of raising funding through a social success note in India. And this is going to cover both aspects if your investors or outcome funders are based offshore or onshore. And then we'll conclude talking about the playbook a little bit towards the end as well, which is really, as I mentioned, the culmination of the webinar, and brings together two case studies that YSB and MSTF really did, one in Uganda, one in India, about how they catalyzed funding for social enterprises using the social success note. So over to you, Amrut and Atula.
Thanks so much, Aparna, for laying out the context there. I think just before I allow Atula to take the floor from here, just in terms of how we've gone about organizing the presentation, Atula will obviously explain the the various legal statutes that would potentially apply to a social success note transaction, and after we've actually provided the audience with a detailed understanding of the broader Indian statutory and legal framework, in the second half of the presentation, I will then explain the various documentation that would be involved in implementing a social success note transaction, and the nuances involved in each of the different legal documents executed amongst the different stakeholders. So Atula, over to you.
Thank you, Amrut, and thank you, Aparna, for the introductions and for setting the context for today's presentation. First off, to quickly take off from the structure that Aparna just walked us through, this is an overview of the legal processes and the legal documentation that will have to be finalized in the course of social success note. It is also possible that an organization working in social development acts as a sort of intermediary that initiates the whole process by identifying potential targets, identifying feasible projects, and onboarding interested counterparties such as the return-seeking investor, the social enterprise, as well as the outcome funder. So first, after financial and a commercial due diligence on the social enterprise that takes place as it does with any fundraising transaction, there is also a legal due diligence that takes place on the social enterprise to identify any potential liabilities that the risk investor and the outcome funder might want to be aware of prior to entering into the transaction. And if there is such an intermediary that I just spoke about within such a structure, there is also a services agreement that will have to be executed between the intermediary and the outcome funder to sort of delineate the roles and responsibilities that the intermediary has in the process and the kind of consideration that they will be receiving in return. As with any debt transaction, the risk investor and the social enterprise will be executing a loan agreement, which will contain the terms and conditions of the loan, the repayment schedule, and any other commercial terms that the parties agreed to. Another very crucial document in this process will be the three-party agreement that the risk investor, the social enterprise, and the outcome payer execute. And it is this document that contains the exact outcomes that the parties want to achieve through the social success note, and will also precisely identify the payment triggers that the outcome funder will have to take into account while paying the incentives to the social enterprise as well as the risk investor. And like Aparna was saying, because there is also the engagement of a monitoring and evaluation partner, there is also the need to execute a services agreement with the monitoring and evaluation partner to identify their precise obligations and deliverables. Over the course of the presentation, we will be going into the contents of each of these processes and each of these documents in a little more detail. Next slide, please, Amrit. All right, so to take a step back, the general routes through which an entity in India can raise funds is on this slide. It can either issue equity or preference shares. Preference shares being a class of shares which have a liquidation preference and a dividend paying preference over an equity share. And of course, if an entity opts for this route to raise funds, they will also be giving up a portion of the control, giving up a portion of the ownership in the company as well. It can also take on debt through loans or non-convertible debentures. And another option that is available to it is in the form of hybrid instruments. And these instruments tend to take on the characteristics of both equity as well as debt. And if it is an eligible entity, another way for it to raise funds is through donations and grants. Now, for the purposes of a social success note, the relevant framework that we will be looking at pertains to debt. And we will also be walking through the provisions of the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, which pertains to donations and grants. And this is to ensure that none of the transactions that take place within a social success note framework fall within its ambit. Next slide, please. So in terms of steps, this is what the procedure for a social success note in India would look like. As I briefly touched upon earlier, if there is an intermediary, they would first conduct market research for the product. They would identify potential counterparties. They would design a structure that is feasible for the social business to achieve, and then onboard all of these parties to commence discussions based on a due diligence on the financial and commercial front, as well as the legal front, and also any other underwriting that the risk investor might want to take up. The terms of the loan will then be finalized, and disbursement to the small and growing business or the social enterprise will take place. After disbursement, the business will utilize this facility in its business based on the end uses that have been defined. And it will also make repayments to the risk investor as agreed. And this is also where the monitoring and evaluation partner comes in. They will perform their baseline, midline, and endline assessments and report these assessments to the outcome payer. And it is based on these reports that the outcome funder will pay its incentives to the risk investor as well as to the social business. Now, this is the general flow that will take place. These are the steps that will take place in the event all the parties involved are domestic, in the event all the parties involved are Indian entities. If any of these entities happen to be foreign counterparties, there are a few other factors that have to be considered as well. That's on the next slide. Right. So very crucially, if the risk investor happens to be situated abroad, if the risk investor is a non-resident, this borrowing that this entity makes can only be made within the framework of the Reserve Bank of India's external commercial borrowings master directions. And if the outcome payer is situated outside of India, both payments that they will be making, one to the monitoring and evaluation partner in consideration for their services, and two, the incentive payments that they will be making to the risk investor as well as the social business, will be seen as consideration for an export of services and will be treated accordingly. To go into the ECB guidelines in more detail. Right. It is also important at that juncture, I want to say that none of the transactions which a foreign outcome payer is making constitutes a donation or a grant under the FCRA, and I'll go into why in a little detail shortly. So the external commercial borrowing guidelines, or the ECB guidelines, are applicable to any borrowing that is made from a non-resident entity to a resident entity. And these borrowings may take the form of a loan, a bond, trade credits, anything that can be constituted as debt. As of 2019, the ECB process has actually been quite streamlined to a significant extent, and borrowings of up to 750 million USD can be taken by a single entity in a particular year under the automatic route. And what the automatic route involves is approaching an authorized dealer bank instead of the RBI to procure an ECB. Now, an authorized dealer bank is simply a bank that is typically designated to handle foreign currency transactions. And if you look at the list of authorized dealer banks in India, a large number of commercial banks that you bank with are also authorized dealer banks. So the procedure involves the filing of a form ECB with an authorized dealer bank, who will then look into the end purpose of the loan, the quantum of the loan, the lender who is making this loan in the first place, and they will then allot what is called a loan registration number prior to the drawdown. The guidelines also prescribe a minimum average maturity period of 3 years. However, for certain end uses, they prescribe longer periods as well, such as for working capital purposes or for on-lending purposes, the minimum average maturity period prescribed is different. The ECB framework also requires a great deal of reporting. There are monthly reports that have to be made to the AD bank in the form ECB2. And very crucially for a social success note structure, it is also important to report any change in the repayment terms that have been agreed upon within the parties. This is something Amrut will be discussing as well. But in the event a risk investor wants to change the repayment schedule or make sure that subsequent tranche disbursements are subject to outcomes, or they want to make modifications in the coupon rate and so on, all of this will have to be reported to the authorized dealer bank as well as the RBI. In terms of who can raise external commercial borrowings, previous slide please, Amrit. The guidelines specify 2 categories. First, it states that any entity that is eligible to receive foreign direct investment under the FEMA framework, or the Foreign Exchange Management Framework, can also receive borrowings under the ECB guidelines. It also says that apart from this category of borrowers, any registered entity that is involved in microfinance, and this could be a society, a trust, or a Section 8 company, is also an eligible entity to raise ECB. Now, if you look at the first category, and if you look at what the FDI, Foreign Direct Investment Policy 2017 says, it specifically sets out that companies who are incorporated under the Companies Act, LLPs who are registered under the LLP Act, startup companies, and investment vehicles who are regulated by SEBI. All of these are specific entities that are authorized to raise FDI and can consequently raise ECBs as well. And while this is very explicitly stated, it is unclear whether this is a route that can be taken by Section 8 company. This is because conceptually equity is the right to receive residual profits in a company. And in a Section 8 company, these profits are only turned inwards to promote its charitable objectives. And because of this, typically Section 8 companies receive funds from abroad in the form of donations, which are then governed by the FCRA. Moving on to the FCRA. Any kind of grant or donation that is made by a foreign entity is governed by the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act. This is something that we all may have noticed, even with respect to small payments that we make on a crowdfunding platform or any kind of fundraising exercises that we see on social media. And the requirements under the FCRA are quite stringent. Firstly, it requires prior registration with the Ministry of Home Affairs through the filing of what is called the Form FC3A. And the Ministry of Home Affairs, in fact, has been quite proactive in conducting audits and cancelling registrations for entities they think do not follow the letter and spirit of the FCRA sufficiently. And this has ended up cutting off funding streams for a number of entities from abroad. There are a lot of reporting requirements here as well, such as the filing of annual returns, which precisely have to set out how these contributions have been utilized and so on. And the persons eligible to receive foreign contributions are individuals, a Hindu undivided family, an association of persons as a society, a trust, or a Section 8 company. So to make sure that any transfer from a foreign entity does not fall within the ambit of the FCRA, the payment needs to have been made in lieu of goods and services rendered by the recipient. So within a social success note structure also, it needs to be clearly stated that the incentive payments made are being done in consideration for the services rendered by the social enterprise in India in the underlying contract, to make sure that there is no ambiguity on this front. Over to you, Amrit.
Yeah, sorry, just took some while to unmute myself. Okay, so thanks, Atula, for outlining the broad legal framework. The next part of the presentation actually focuses on the procedures and timelines and some of the nuances involved in the various legal documentation to be executed to implement the social success note transaction. I think, as was alluded to by both Aparna and Atula, in the earlier slides as well, a very critical component of the pre-transaction procedure for a social success note is the activity of a financial, commercial, technical, and legal due diligence. This is extremely important because all stakeholders, involved in the transaction need to have comfort about the ability of the small and growing business or the social enterprise to be able to deliver the necessary, the desired impact. And while impact is one of the critical factors, obviously from a financial, commercial, and from a legal standpoint, all stakeholders are also interested in understanding the ability of the small and growing business to be able to service the loan, because that is an important aspect of the entire social success note transaction. The ability of the social enterprise to comply with all applicable laws. We get into the specific risks associated with non-compliance in the subsequent slides as well. And obviously, from a financial and commercial standpoint, there is a significant amount of homework and interest that needs to be done to understand whether the business model of the small and growing business is feasible or not. Therefore, I mean, based on our experience in structuring other kinds of investment and debt transactions, we anticipate that the entire due diligence process could, at a very minimum, take anywhere between 1 to 2 months. It also depends on the age of the entity, the the amount of time that the company has been in existence for. Clearly, on account of the the longer the company has been in existence for, there are a number of other historical issues that would need to be examined, whether from a commercial, technical, or legal standpoint as well. So therefore, the timelines indicated here are broadly, are just a broad ballpark of the timelines that we anticipate in a transaction of this kind. Do bear in mind that, as Aparna and Riya also indicated, there are very few precedents of social success note transactions as of today. So this is an evolving, timeline, an evolving framework. And so consequently, we also anticipate that the more number of, SSN transactions that happen in India, like with every other kind of investment, you will definitely see a streamlining of both procedures and timelines over a period of time. So once the due diligence activity is completed, if there are no obvious red flags from either a technical, legal, commercial standpoint, which would diminish the appetite of a risk investor to make that investment in a small and growing business, the next step would be for the investor to offer the commercial terms, for the loan to be granted to the small and growing business. This is also the time frame. This is also the point in time when they would also, agree on the outcomes that are to be achieved if the risk investor is to be paid by the outcome funder, and if the social enterprise itself is to receive any incentive payments from the outcome funder. Again, here, this being broadly in the form of either a sanction letter or a term sheet, an indicative term sheet, at a very conservative estimate, we would anticipate that this would take anywhere between a week to 2 weeks. This can be short-circuited if the intermediary as well as the risk investor already have a defined set of terms that they would like to offer to the small and growing business. And so consequently, if that is already available, that can also be done in parallel to the due diligence exercise as well. Once the the commercial terms have been finalized, then we actually get into drafting out the transaction documentation. And if we have to go back to the previous slides, the documentation involved in a social success note transaction would include a loan agreement and a tripartite agreement between the social enterprise, the risk investor, and the outcome funder, the evaluation services agreement, the agreement between the the risk investor and the intermediary. So these are and most critically, sorry once again. Yeah, and most critically, also the outcome funding agreement as well. This process of drafting up the various documents and negotiating the documents to every party's satisfaction could again take anywhere between a month to 2 months. Obviously, if all parties are aligned and if all parties can move very quickly to obtain all necessary internal corporate approvals, whether it's at the investor's end or at the social enterprise's end, this time frame could again be short-circuited somewhat. And then obviously once the negotiation has been done, you move into executing the various documents and to actually making the disbursement of the loan itself. Yeah. So from a legal standpoint, I think the first major process that needs to be completed is for the risk investor or the intermediary. And bear in mind that given that there are very few precedents of social success note transactions as yet, this can be commissioned by either the intermediary or by the by the risk investor. It really depends on the agreement that the two entities have amongst themselves. So in which case, the appointment of the law firm or a legal counsel could be done either by the risk investor or by the by the intermediary. The legal due diligence would typically focus on the following broad areas of any small and growing business. The investor and the other stakeholders, including the outcome funder, would want to have an idea of the corporate governance framework that the enterprise has adopted. So have they conducted, regular governing body meetings? So I use the word governing body very broadly because if the enterprise is in the form of a trust, then you're looking at whether the board of trustees has held regular meetings. But on the other hand, if it's a private limited company or a Section 8 company, has the board been constituted in an appropriate manner? Have the board meetings been held, within the statutorily prescribed time intervals? Has the enterprise maintained all necessary statutory registers? Has it made all its annual return filings, periodic returns under various legislations, whether it's under the Companies Act or under applicable employment laws? Has it obtained all licenses to run its business? So every business would have a range of licenses that are required to be obtained for the conduct of its business. So that is a key area that would be examined by a legal counsel. In the event that the enterprise has already raised, even if it's a small amount of funding, whether it's either from a conventional lender or from a from an equity investor, the incoming risk investor would want to have an understanding of the shareholding structure of the social enterprise and an understanding of the terms and conditions offered to the previous lender, if there is a lender, from whom the company has already borrowed certain amounts of money. And the last, and these are just the broad indicative areas. There may be other areas. For example, if a company has, been embroiled in a litigation, then it would make absolute sense for the company to disclose the fact upfront in a legal due diligence exercise. The idea is to make sure that there are no surprises for any risk investor, because they're already taking a risk, in taking a bet on a social business where an investor would probably be difficult to find. A conventional investor would be difficult to find. The last thing that they would want is any other kind of nasty surprises, which they may only come to know upon, becoming involved in the affairs of the company. So these are just a few broad areas. In the interest of time, I'm just confining myself to these areas. I think moving on, so once the diligence has been done, then we get into drafting and negotiating various documentation involved in a social success note transaction. And obviously, I think by now, as all of you would have figured out, while the terminology is a social success note, it really is a combination of, or a network of various related agreements that all have to be put together at the same point in time. And there has to be a clear linkage between each of these agreements for the social success note to be appropriately structured. So obviously, I think like Atula has already delved into the details of the loan agreement, which has, in the event that the lender is a foreign lender, the additional obligation is for you to comply with the ECB regulations. But any loan agreement, whether it's a domestic loan or an external commercial borrowing, would need to record the size of the loan, the rate of interest that is payable on the loan. In this particular case, there will also need to be an understanding of what are the outcome payments and when the lender would be entitled to receive an outcome payment from the outcome funder. Whether the loan would be dispersed in one, all at one go, or whether there would be a tranche-wise distribution of the loan, what would be the coupon rate, and also an understanding of other clauses that are commonly seen in all loan agreements, whether it's a commercial loan agreement or a loan agreement in this particular transaction. I think that's also there, in the slide that is before you at this particular point. The loan agreement would need to understand would need to document what happens in the event of a default. What are the consequences for the lender as well as for the borrower in the event of a default. So I think in one of the social success notes, the lenders also reserve the right to pre-close the loan. In the event that it is of the view that the social enterprise is not meeting the desired outcomes as well. So a clear drafting and definition of the situations and the circumstances in which either the lender or there would be very few circumstances in which the borrower would have the right to terminate, but this would largely document the lender's right to terminate. The other thing that obviously has assumed significance because we are now living in a COVID-19 world is what are the consequences of a force majeure event. So how would an event like COVID-19 affect the performance of the loan agreement? Again, Atula actually alluded to it there, at least under the ECB framework, if you are going to modify the terms of repayment because of the fact that there has been a force majeure event, then bear in mind that you would also need to make, you would also need to notify your authorized dealer bank and through the authorized dealer bank, the Reserve Bank of India as well, on the changes to the terms and conditions of the loan agreement. In the event, it is a domestic loan agreement, you will also need to watch out for any notifications that may have been issued by the Reserve Bank of India, or for that matter, if there are any other governmental notifications which may possibly extend a moratorium to a borrower for a repayment, then those would need to be appropriately factored into while defining what is a force majeure event and when would that trigger. Pre-COVID-19, most force majeure clauses may or may not have had the outbreak of an infectious disease being classified as a force majeure event. So if they hadn't done it, then clearly legally they may not be on a firm footing while trying to invoke a force majeure clause. But post-COVID-19, you can be sure that every legal counsel would need to bear in mind that the force majeure clause would need to be drafted fairly broadly, for there to be for there to be a trigger in the event of circumstances that we can't comprehend at this point in time. Who knows? There could be another, and God forbid, there could be another infectious, disease outbreak. So you can't confine it to only COVID-19. You'll have to draft it up in as broad a manner to cover any kind of an outbreak of infectious diseases. The other thing that you need to bear in mind is, I'll come to the MNE services agreement. There are certain standardized terms across all documentation. And in a transaction such as the social success note, which relies on there being a well-defined network of contracts, it's also important for all parties to the transaction to have a common governing law and dispute resolution mechanism to be stated across the respective contracts. The reason for this is you don't want to have a situation where a loan agreement may have been terminated and there is a dispute between the social enterprise and the lender, uh, that is subject to a particular governing law and dispute resolution mechanism. But at the same point in time, the other documents that are also linked to the same transaction require a governing law and dispute resolution, or stipulate a governing law and dispute resolution mechanism, which is different. So for instance, if the loan agreement is governed by the laws of India and the dispute resolution mechanism stated in the loan agreement is that the courts of Bombay will have exclusive jurisdiction to determine disputes under the agreement. You don't want to have a scenario where the M&E services agreement is governed by either a different country's law or the dispute resolution mechanism is an arbitral mechanism, a private arbitral mechanism, where the seat of arbitration is maybe either in India or outside India as well, in which case you're actually looking at significant legal costs, time, energy being expended in different fora, which is completely unavoidable, which is completely avoidable at this particular point in time. The other thing is you also would need to appreciate that in a social success note transaction, each of the contracts have to be coterminous in nature. For instance, if the loan agreement, which is the basis for the entire transaction, if that document terminates, then the outcome funding agreement automatically should terminate. And so also the M&E services agreement. Because of the fact that the underlying transaction itself has fallen away and there is no basis to the M&E services being provided or the outcomes being funded or paid for. So these are things that you would need to keep in mind while structuring all the transaction documents. Moving to the M&E services agreement, the M&E services agreement basically is structured between the outcome funder and an independent third-party M&E services provider who has been chosen by the outcome funder. The outcome funder outlines what are the roles of the evaluator. Do bear in mind that the evaluator must have no conflict of interest, in that he should not have any interest in either the social enterprise who he is evaluating, or who he or it is evaluating, or the risk investor as well, such that there is any incentive for the evaluation service provider to manipulate the evaluation. So clearly, there will be, background checks done on the evaluation services contractor in that sense. There would be reps and warranties that would be obtained from the evaluation services agency. The evaluation services agency would only be required to measure the outcomes based on a framework that has already been outlined by the investor, the outcome funder, and the social enterprise. The evaluator should not have any role to play in setting the outcomes that are to be evaluated by it. So I think the other thing that the evaluation services agreement would also outline is the periodicity within which such evaluation needs to be conducted. Will it be, so there is what is known as a baseline, a midline, and an end line evaluation. Is it going to be an ongoing evaluation, or will there be a one-time evaluation at predefined, on the occurrence of predefined events? That would be outlined within the terms and conditions of an M&E services agreement. I think we've already looked at the in the tripartite agreement and the loan agreement. You are going to have an understanding of what happens if the social enterprise fails to meet the desired outcomes. Like I mentioned earlier, there could also be capital protection clauses. The lender would want to pre-close the loan in certain circumstances. If that is the case, then it must be documented, within the loan agreement and the tripartite agreement. There will be clear reporting requirements on the social enterprise. There will also be requirements to retain human resources that are assigned to the project. So, there will be, there could be a requirement from the investor to ensure that certain key personnel are not, are not terminated during the course of the project, and that if there is, a key personnel whose services are either terminated or who leaves, whether that would actually constitute a material adverse, event that could lead to certain consequences under the loan agreement. Those are certain things that would need to be defined in the tripartite agreement and the loan agreement. There will also be covenants against mission drift, and there will need to be cure periods which will enable the the social enterprise to rectify or remedy any breach of any covenants under the loan agreement as well. Yeah, I think there are a few other things that you need to bear in mind. I don't believe that any governmental body, at least in India till date, has been an outcome payer in any such pay for performance transaction, whether it's a social success note or a development impact bond or a social impact bond, unlike in the UK or in the US, where you've had municipal bodies actually being outcome payers. If it does come to that, you'll also need to bear in mind that then the government is the outcome payer. And so when you're actually signing up a contract with a governmental agency, you may need to look at legislations around transparency in public procurement, submitting tenders or going through a bidding process in response to a call for proposal from the government, or actually striking up an MOU with a memorandum of understanding with the governmental agency. You should also bear in mind that with a governmental agency, you will in all likelihood be presented with standard form contracts with limited negotiation. Watch out for any clauses that will give the governmental agency sovereign immunity in the event of a breach of an agreement. A sovereign immunity clause basically, implies that even if there has been a breach by the governmental agency, it cannot be, it cannot be taken to a court of law, or there cannot be it can't be hauled to a dispute resolution forum seeking remedies against the government. I think, I think very quickly, just touching on a few other clauses of relevance to each stakeholder. So if you're a small and growing business, make sure that you commit to a repayment schedule that is realistic, which is based on your loan servicing capabilities. Understand the events of default and consequences of default very clearly before you enter into the loan agreement. Understand what rights you are providing to the lender in the event of structuring a loan agreement with the risk investor, whether the lender would have a right to appoint a director on the board of the small and growing business. These are seen in conventional loan transactions, and these are commonly seen in the event of a default. But if this is to be the case here, then the enterprise needs to be well aware of it, and they would need to weigh up this before they enter into the loan agreement as well. From a lender's perspective, it would be useful to make sure that again the payment schedule is defined clearly, both for the social enterprise as well as for the outcome payer as well, so that the lender knows that in the event the outcomes have been met, then it can make a claim for the outcome payments from the outcome funder. The lender may want to build in assignment clauses so that in the event another entity of the lender takes over the loan or the loan portfolio, then these are standard rights that are typically available in commercial loan transactions. From an outcome payer standpoint, obviously the most critical provision for the outcome payer is to understand when it becomes liable to make the outcome payment. So what are the triggers and what are the timelines? And also on, on the completion of the deliverables by the monitoring and evaluation services partner to the satisfaction of the outcome funder, that is probably when the outcome payer would make itself liable to make the outcome payments. Therefore, from the outcome payer standpoint, the relationship with the M&E service provider is very critical. Again, when you look at the M&E partner, what needs to be done between the outcome funder and the M&E partner is to define the roles and responsibilities very clearly, to outline what are the expected deliverables and the frequency in which those deliverables need to be provided, and to also outline the payment mechanics for the M&E partner as well. And yes, like I pointed out earlier, one of the things that all of these stakeholders would need to understand is what happens if there is a termination of the underlying transaction document, which is the loan agreement as well. Yeah, and I think a very quick overview, a comparative view of the legal framework for various funding instruments. We've already gone through the SSN. In comparison to that, when you look at the development impact bond or a social impact bond, I think what you would also need to understand here is typically DIBs are done through grants, and they are typically targeted at not-for-profit organizations. So you would need to have an understanding of the grant agreement. If the grantor is a domestic grantor, there are no additional regulatory complications. But if the grantor is a foreign entity, then you would also need to understand the implications under the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. We've already looked at a conventional loan. What is the regulatory framework for a conventional loan? And obviously, the reason why equity would not come into the picture in the context of an SSN transaction is because typically here you're not really looking to carve out a part of your company and offer it up to a risk investor. The risk investor here is only interested in giving you a loan and is interested in the loan being returned to it with in interest rates along with interest rates being paid to it as well. So therefore, the risk for for a typical SSN transaction is, I would say, somewhere between it sits in terms of the risk pyramid. It sits between a conventional loan where the lender takes little or no risk because of the fact that he's entitled to receive both principal and interest payments, irrespective of the underlying financial position of the enterprise. On the other hand, in an equity investment transaction, the investors only get paid a dividend or get returned their capital if there has been a successful liquidation event where there has been an appreciation of capital by the of the particular enterprise in question as well. We've looked at a few other parameters here in terms of legal costs for implementing these transactions. Yes, at this particular point in time, because of the network of contracts, it may appear to be slightly higher in comparison to grants, loan, and equity, where the framework is fairly well defined. But as we see it, the more number of transactions that happen in this space, we anticipate that the costs will come down. We also anticipate that the time taken to implement an SSN transaction would also come down, progressively over a period of time. We've looked at the various players involved in each of these transactions, and again, eligibility of entities to access either an SSN or a DIB or an SIB or a grant or a loan or an equity investor as well. I think with that we have pretty much covered the ground in terms of the presentation. I will obviously stop sharing the screen at this point in time and then or do I need to keep it on? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll hand this over first to Sucharita, and then from there on, we can move to the next part of this presentation.
Thanks, Amrut and Atula. Yeah, so this is sort of just to let you know that a lot of the nitty-gritty details we believe you will find in this playbook, so please do watch for that. Would like to say thank you very much to SAP as well, who are not represented on this panel, because they're the ones who sort of put a lot of the money into the running of our SGB Finance Learning Lab. With that, over to Ria, who've also been sort of partners with us on this project, for her closing remarks. And we'll request you to not sort of go away. We do have your question and answers. So Ria, I think we'll come to closing remarks once we're done with Q&A, so we can put all the eager beavers out of their misery. But also wanted to acknowledge the SDG Finance Facility's role in sort of getting the message out there, so we can have more of these transactions that Amrut referred to, and get better at doing this and providing access to capital to the many social enterprises that really do need it. So with that, I will sort of, you see the Q&A, then we'll go from top to bottom. So first question from Stan Tan is, how is an SSN different from an SIB? So you went through some of that, Amrut, but just checking if there's anything else that you'd like to highlight. Maybe Aparna, you as well, once Amrut is done.
Okay. Yeah, I think there are some very interesting nuances and differences. So in a social success note, the outcome funder actually pays both the social enterprise as well as the risk investor. Whereas in a social impact bond, the government is the outcome funder, or I think I'll call on Aparna and Ria to probably share their experiences in structuring SIB transactions. But the difference there is that there is an incentive for the in an SSN, there is an incentive payment that is also available for the enterprise itself, which is not a feature that is typically accorded in a social impact bond or a development impact bond transaction. These are, this is just one of the differences. Like I think pointed out in the concluding slide as well, typically the route for an SIB or a DIB is through a grant, whereas in an SSN, it's actually a commercial loan, even if it's at a at a discounted market rate to a regular commercial loan. The fact is that it is a loan transaction which the entity has to repay the risk investor. The principal has to be repaid, and the outcome funder tops up the interest payment, as Aparna had outlined right at the beginning of the conversation. Aparna, sorry, feel free to interject and add.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just kind of build on what you said, Amrut. So I think you covered that. See, the underlying instrument in a social impact bond or a development impact bond is a grant, right, which is being typically paid to a non-profit. And for those not familiar with what an SIB or a DIB is, simply put, a social impact bond is where a government is an outcome funder, and a development impact bond is when a development agency or another philanthropic organization is the outcome funder. So one is on the instrument itself. The second is the structure. So like Amrut mentioned, in a impact bond, what happens is that the service provider is not liable to pay back anything, right? Whereas in a social success note, as I mentioned at the start of the webinar as well, the principal repayment has to be made by the underlying service provider. So it has to be an entity with a revenue model so that they can service the principal. And again, it's not hard and fast. It could be principal and a small amount of the interest, and the outcome funder is topping up that interest payment. Or it could be that the service provider just takes care of the principal and the outcome funder takes care of the entire interest amount. So it's typically on a sliding scale, and this is really dependent on the contracting that happens between the three organizations, the outcome funder, the risk investor, and the social enterprise. How do they want to split that interest payment? And most importantly, what are the outcomes and what will actually trigger these payments? I think it's important to outline that both instruments, impact bonds and social success notes, are outcome-based payments, also called pay for success. So payments are only triggered if predetermined specified social outcomes or environmental outcomes are made. And I think just one other last point, again, given that we've not had a ton of precedence with social success notes, on the impact bond side, we have about 185 odd of these. There is no hard and fast rule. It's, it is a contract between the three parties. So there can be incentive payments for service providers, both in an impact bond as well as in a social success note. In an impact bond, it could be the risk investor who could choose to incentivize the service provider, if they outperform. And likewise, in a social success note, it's the outcome funder who would incentivize the social enterprise. I think there was a linked question from Peter as well, what 4A is in that diagram that we had shown. And that's essentially what it is. The outcome funder can choose to further incentivize a social enterprise to take away the loan repayment burden as well. But again, there's no hard and fast rule. It's really between the organizations how they structure it. Ria, if you want to add anything on top of that.
I think that covers it in a nutshell. I mean, just think of it as a grant versus a loan. If you're a social enterprise and you're taking a loan, very simply, a social success note would work for you. Whereas if you're a not-for-profit or even a for-profit that is able to take in a grant, you'll be going in for a impact bond model.
The next question from Amit Chaudhary is, he asks if FCRA is required if a for-profit company gets a grant.
I can take that.
Offers that for tax in India.
So Amit, typically under the FCRA, registration itself can be done only by a society, a trust, or a Section 8 company. The idea here is that this is a donation which they might be using towards charitable purposes, be it educational, cultural, social, and such. And this may not necessarily be something that a private limited company's objects clause contains. But apart from the registration route, there is something called the prior permission route for entities that are not eligible for registration under the FCRA, and that is taken up on a case-to-case basis by the Ministry of Home Affairs. So perhaps this could be something that entities might, private limited companies might want to explore, but I'm not aware of this being a very common situation. Besides, there are also rules within the Companies Act which prohibit private limited companies from taking on deposits. So it's also important that these kind of donations do not fall within that category. Amrit, if you want to add something else.
I think that's pretty much the answer.
Okay, so the next question from Preet. In such a multi-party transaction, what broad range would legal fees fall in? I know we've tried to address this in the playbook, but nevertheless, this is important to understand the size threshold of the loans such that the SSN is economically feasible.
Yeah, I think it's one, to be absolutely honest with you, we've not done a live SSN transaction till date. But if we were to extrapolate what we would do in a typical lending transaction along with the other documents that we've just outlined, and also it depends on the nature of the due diligence and the extent of due diligence that will be done on the enterprise. So very, very hard to put a number, but a range at a very conservative level could, be anywhere between 4 to 6 lakhs to start with. Once things become a little more standardized, if there is a fair degree of track record that the the lender has in implementing these transactions, and so therefore the documents can be standardized. You will see that in line with most other kinds of investment transactions, the legal fees will settle down at an agreed range based on the the effort that would be put in by the legal counsel in such transactions. But at this particular point in time, it's very difficult to say that. It also depends on the total amount of time that is spent. I think I already indicated what are the time ranges, what are the various documents as well. If some of those documents can be short-circuited, if the processes can be streamlined, if the documents can be drafted up in a simple manner between various parties as well. Remember, the other thing that you also need to understand is if the legal costs can be shared amongst the various participants to the transaction, it may not appear to be as prohibitive. It can be built into the transaction cost in an effective manner. I'm not sure if I gave you the right answer, but these are, at this point in time, it's very difficult to give anything other than just what I would say is an educated guess.
Great, thanks, Amrut. And I know we're sort of almost out of time. So Ria, I'm going to hand it over to you for your closing remarks and then the poll quickly. So do request the participants to please hold on, because the poll will help us sort of determine next steps and give you what it is that you feel we need in this ecosystem here. Over to you, Ria.
Well, thanks, Suchi, and thank you, Atula and Amrut, for putting together that presentation. I hope we've been able to answer some of the key questions that were raised. And as Aparna suggested, we would have a social success note playbook coming out with a lot more details, and it would specifically give a lot more insight into what really went behind the two case studies that have been captured, one which is within India and one which is in Kenya. And I think, just to summarize what we as a group here stand for as next steps, where do we see this conversation going? I think, the journey with the Andy SGB Lab has been one where we started where let's just try to demystify what a social success note is. And then it went on further to understand what are the nitty-gritties of this instrument and how can it be used. And I think now we're at a stage where we really want to go ahead and pilot this at a much larger scale and try to experiment with it in ways that hasn't been done before. So I think from all parties involved here, and I think this is something that as the Andy SGB Lab and the UNDP SDG Finance Facility, that we really see this as an instrument that can help a lot of our MSMEs in this time of need. I think there's so much of capital crunch that a number of small businesses face at this point, and your direct equity or your traditional debt instruments may not be best suited for you at this time. So if you are a social enterprise that is keen and has fairly clearly aligned goals and you're willing to be measured against those development outcomes, I think we'd like to try our best to help figure out how we can experiment and pilot with this instrument. And I think the other thing that is also there within all of us is to experiment and figure out how can we create templatized documents. I think Preet, just to your question, I think the legal costs, etc., as we've seen with impact bonds, a lot of it can be answered if we have those templatized documents in place. So we're inching towards that journey. It's a slow one, but I think, as compared to our impact bonds and the journey around there, because a loan is a relatively easier understood concept, and it's a fairly cleaner concept, I think this journey can be a lot faster as compared to our other pay-for-performance instruments. So 2 steps, which are very clear sort of call to actions, and we'd like to partner and collaborate with any agencies, social enterprises, even philanthropists and outcome funders who are willing to experiment with what they're doing right now and experiment how do we go beyond just giving grants to organizations to being able to figure out how do we accelerate more with the limited amount of money that's there in hand. So with that regards, experimenting with the pilot and then as we go along trying to create these templatized documents is something that we really see as our next steps going ahead. And I think at this point, Suchi, I'd just like to quickly invite you in for the poll. I know we're running short on time. As Suchi said, I think the poll will really help us also get a better sense of how we could cater to the information that is requested by the market much better. And we'd also be able to give a better insight into how we could collaborate with different partners who are keen to work around this topic. So Suchi, back to you.
Thanks, Ria. All right, great. Thank you so much, everyone. Just to say, I know we saw a few questions in the end to reassure you that we will make sure we have them answered in the summaries that get circulated to all of you. You have our contact details. Happy to put you guys in touch with each other. So please do reach out to us. And please do continue to stay engaged. We'd love to hear from you. And see how we can continue this work so that if it's of benefit to you and for the ecosystem. Panelists, thank you very much once again. And with that, we'll say bye for now and until next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thanks for joining.